So 3 take-home messages from the epidemiology. One is that we're on a very favorable downward slope in the prevalence of smoking. We're really at a modern low. We haven't been this low since the 1930s. That's good news. The second is even those people who keep smoking are smoking fewer cigarettes than previous smokers. And the third is a sort of an unfortunate consequence of the reduction of smoking is that smoking is now pretty much limited to people who are disadvantaged. And of course, that reflects people who live in public housing. So let's go to the next slide. So this shows you both for men and women, the decrease in smoking. And we're now, as I said, at a modern low. Only 14% of adults currently smoke cigarettes. You notice there was a huge gap in the 50s and 60s between men and women. And then there were some very clever marketing campaigns. You've come a long way, baby. And women's rates didn't go down the way men's did. And so now there's a small gender gap, but it isn't much. Next, please. And it used to be thought that as people stopped smoking, what would happen is that the light smokers would stop. And so the people who were heavy smokers would keep smoking. And that would actually result in the fact that continuing smokers would be smoking more. But that didn't happen. As you can see in the red line, between 1965 and about 1997, the average smoker was smoking a pack a day of cigarettes. And since then, it has declined. So now the average smoker is smoking only about 14 cigarettes per day, which means that it'll be easier for them to stop because they're not as addicted to the nicotine. The reason I think that they're smoking fewer cigarettes is because of all the public health policies that we discussed previously, the taxes, the clean indoor air laws, and the stigma surrounding smoking. Next. So this shows where smoking is concentrated today. And let's go from left to right, top to bottom. So the ethnic group with the highest rate of smoking is American Indians, Alaska Natives, followed by whites and blacks are essentially at the same level, followed by Hispanics and then Asians, who have the lowest levels. That's one of the reasons California does so well, because we have such a disproportionately high concentration of those populations. As opposed to in my parents' generation, where a lot of people with very sophisticated educational background were smokers, today that doesn't happen. In fact, only 1% of doctors are smokers. 40% of people with a GED are smokers, and that's probably because a lot of people get their GED in prison. So the lower the education, the higher the rate of smoking. And the same is true with poverty. The same is true with health insurance, uninsured, disability, LGBT, and serious psychological distress. So again, smoking is now concentrated in people who have a hard time in life anyhow. And so we have framed this at Smoking Cessation Leadership Center as a social justice issue. Next, please. And let's expand a little bit on smoking and behavioral health. So of the 500,000 or so annual deaths from smoking, about 240,000 occur in people with chronic mental illness or substance abuse populations. And this group consumes about 40%, that's amazing, of all the cigarettes sold in the United States. This is a function of the fact that people with a behavioral health condition are more likely to smoke. When they smoke more, and also they smoke right down to the butt. They die earlier than others, and smoking is a large contributor to that earlier death rate. So they die of COPD, heart disease, stroke, lung cancer. They're at greater risk for nicotine withdrawal. And then as they smoke and become more isolated, then that compounds the social stigma and makes it harder for them to re-enter more of a normal population. Next, please. So this shows adult tobacco use by state. And I'm going to call out the 7 states represented on this call. So California, I'm going to do this in alphabetical order, is the second lowest state in the country. It's 11.3%. The lowest is Utah, but Utah is a special case because 50% of the population is Mormon who are not supposed to smoke. So if you corrected for that, California would actually be the lowest state. Florida is 16.1%. Kentucky, the good news is that they've got a long way to go. There's a lot of opportunity. The bad news is that they're probably the highest state now with a prevalence of 24.6%. Missouri is at 20.8%. Pennsylvania at 18.7%. South Carolina at 18.8%, and New York is at 14.1%. Next. And this just shows a similar concentration of people with serious mental illness who smoke cigarettes by state, showing this is a little bit older data, but that the same kind of a proportionality exists in this population too. And before we go to the next slide, which to me is one of the starkest and most troubling slides that I'm going to show you, I want to point out that as the states go, the disease follows. So let's go to the next one. And this is the concentration of lung cancer cases. Now, it's an older slide. It's about 10 to 12 years old, maybe even more. But you can see that smoking is concentrated where lung cancer is in the tobacco nation states. And so that we have a real challenge to reduce illness, to reduce lung cancer, to try to lower the rate of smoking. Next, please. This just shows that the myth that people with behavioral health conditions can't stop is a myth. And you can see the top blue line that there's been actually a major decline in smoking among people with a behavioral health condition over the last decade, from 41.5% to 30.5%, actually a faster decline than in the general population without a behavioral health condition. The numbers are slightly different from the other one I showed you because this is a SAMHSA survey, not the other one that we were talking about. And next slide, please. And pointing out, again, what we said, that people with mental health or substance use disorders represent a quarter of the population, but 20% of all the cigarettes smoked. And next, please. That's the end of our slide deck. So I think we have time to take questions if there are any. And we're also interested in the case presentation, which is going to come soon. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, Steve, that was me. I was talking. I had a really good question. I'm going to repeat it. So here's my question. So the decline of patients with behavioral health conditions who are not the decline of cigarette smokers. Can you just comment a little bit on what you think is working well to help people with behavioral health conditions quit smoking?
Sure. I think part of it is the policies that we talked about last time. That is the taxes. A lot of people with behavioral health conditions are poor, and there's a huge financial burden to buying cigarettes. That's one of them. The second is that we're constricting the spaces where they can smoke. The third is the stigma. But a fourth one, which is the space that our center has been working in, is that for many years, clinicians caring for this population felt, oh dear, it's their only pleasure, let's not take it from them, or it's not the most important thing, or it's going to make their underlying mental health or substance abuse condition worse. But as we've explored the science, we found actually that smoking cessation improves their mental health condition, makes it more likely if they have an alcohol or drug use problem that they'll be sober. And so that's been a major factor too. So it's multifactorial, but it's really good news. And we like to think that there's been really a cultural change and that we've changed the landscape in this, and it's only going to keep getting better.
That's great. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I like that. I like thinking about the landscape change that we'll keep seeing improvements for sure. And I definitely remember in my training that we were not necessarily going after tobacco use for people with behavioral health conditions, and that was, you know, in the more distant past than I'd like to admit, but it's not so distant.